Welcome to Faith and Freedom. For the next few minutes, we hope to inform, inspire, and encourage you as we discuss legal victories and challenges to your fundamental freedom and religious liberties. Faith and Freedom comes to you from Liberty Counsel, a civil liberties education and legal defense organization. Join us now as Matt Staver, founder and chairman of Liberty Counsel, explains the latest legal issues all across this country. In the courtrooms of America, Liberty Counsel is winning the battle for your constitutional freedom.
The Alabama Supreme Court rules that the word child applies to the preborn. I am Matt Staver, founder and chairman of Liberty Counsel. Joining me is Matt Barber, vice president of Liberty Counsel Action. Matt, this Alabama Supreme Court decision is a great decision. I think it advances the personhood idea that in Alabama, the word child, as it relates to child endangerment statutes, applies to the preborn. It involves two individuals who were taking drugs while they were pregnant, and ultimately, one of the children died. The other one lived. Both of them were prosecuted under the law. And the question was, does the word child endangerment, the law prohibiting child endangerment, apply to the preborn? And the Alabama Supreme Court said that, in fact, it does. Yeah, this moves the ball forward, Matt, and it's in keeping with medical science. You know, as we've talked about, when the Supreme Court in Roe v. Wade and Doe v. Bolton somehow decided that in the face of all the scientific evidence to the contrary, an unborn child is not a person, they had to do some real mental gymnastics in order to reach that conclusion. This law gets us back on the right track and says, of course, a child in utero is still a child, just in a different stage of development. But this is also in keeping with the Unborn Victims of Violence Act, a federal law. But for some reason, you know, the incongruity here that a woman can go down to an abortion clinic and have her child killed, but if somebody else attacks her and hurts that child within her, then that's somehow murder. Finally, we're starting to the two things are coming together. We're starting to have a reasonable understanding of what is and what is not a person. The case involved two different situations, both consolidated before the Alabama Supreme Court. One involved an individual lady who was pregnant, and at the time of birth, she tested positive for cocaine, and her child also tested positive. And then another was an individual who gave birth, and she tested positive for, I think, a methamphetamine, and the child also was addicted to methamphetamine in the womb, and that child died. And so both of them were prosecuted by the state for willful child endangerment. And part of the defenses were that the word child doesn't apply to the preborn. Right. Well, there's a lot of statutes in Alabama already that do apply child to the preborn. And in fact, they not only looked at Alabama, but they looked at other state laws as well in the other states, and ultimately ruled that the word child in the child endangerment law does in fact apply to the preborn, and upheld those convictions. One of the great things about this particular decision is it overviews the laws of many states with regards to, in fact, all 50 states in several different categories. Property, wills, trust, and estates, tort law, where you have a personal injury, and criminal law. Those four areas, and in all four of those areas, all of the states, or the vast majority of the states, depending upon which category you're looking at, ultimately apply personhood to the child. So we can go down through each one of those, and I think it's fascinating to do so, and the opinion is fascinating to read. Liberty Counsel filed an amicus brief in this case, and we overviewed through history before the United States, during the founding of the United States, and all the way up to the present, that children are considered persons in the womb and accorded legal rights. And the only aberration to that, and this is what the opinion points out, is Roe versus Wade in the area of abortion. That's the only area that's on an island all by itself. Well, yeah, you mentioned, common law in England and in the United States, states with support from the medical and legal professions recognize that, quote, life is the immediate gift of God, a right inherent in every individual, and it begins in contemplation of law as soon as an infant is able to stir in the mother's womb. And again, as we pointed out, this was the prevailing view in all of Western civilization until a bunch of activist judges, spurred on by a radical pro-abortion lobby, decided to turn logic and reason on its head and say that up is down and down is up. Yeah, and the reason why they use the word quickening or stirring in the mother's womb is because back then they didn't have ultrasound. And they didn't have some of those other diagnostic studies to determine when life begins. So for them not having the medical devices, life began when you felt the baby move in your womb. And at that point in time, that child was protected by the law. Killing that child would also result in penalties for the perpetrator, having an injury to the child. All of these areas of law gave personhood to the child. And that continued to happen through history. Eventually, these common laws became part of the statutes, and those statutes began moving personhood back earlier in the pregnancy. Why? Because of the development of science and technology.
Right.
And that continued to happen and continues to happen to this day. And the only difference is in Roe versus Wade. So, for example, wills, trust, and estates. If there's a child in utero and someone dies and they leave a will to the individuals that are part of the family, and you have someone who's in that line of family that would take to the will, and they're pregnant with an individual, there's a guardian ad litem that's appointed for that unborn child. Why? Because that child has the rights to the property under that will, even though they are preborn. And that's pretty common across the country. If you have an auto accident or some kind of personal injury, a tort is what it's called, and you injure the mother and you injure the child, guess what? There is a cause of action by the mother against you for the injury and also by the unborn child against you for that injury as well. In criminal law, you remember the double homicide in California where Peterson.
Right, Scott
Peterson killed his wife,
Lacey
Peterson, and also she was pregnant. And you have what? Not just one murder, but a double homicide. So he's charged with homicide against the preborn and against his
little Connor Peterson was counted as
the second victim of the homicide. And you can go down through each one of these areas of law. And the only one that's different is Roe versus Wade.
Yeah.
That makes absolutely no logical, legal, historical, or medical sense.
Well, here's what's happened. Science is advancing along to 1973. At this point, in common law, the best science that they had said, as you mentioned, the quickening, or if they felt the child stirring. Well, science and politics and law met this crossroads and went in divergent ways. Science continued to progress, and we found out, wow, life really begins, in fact, at the moment of conception. That's conventional wisdom. Even with pro-abortion scientists will acknowledge that. But for the political calculus, the legal calculus headed down a road away from reality toward we want to have our cake and eat it too. If we want to kill this unborn child for convenience sake, we're going to hit the gavel and say that a woman has some kind of phantom constitutional right to do that. Well, science, reason, and the pro-abortion logic, neither the twain shall meet.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And, you look at in 1973, we're coming up to 40 years since Roe versus Wade, January 22, 1973. About 55 million children have lost their lives through abortion. And back then, 8 years before 1973, you go back to 1965, I believe it was, in Life magazine, the front cover of Life magazine was the preborn child in the womb.
Yeah.
And the entire section of that big magazine was about the development from the moment of conception all the way till birth. They knew that it was a person in the womb, and they flatly ignored that reality and ultimately said that there's abortion for all 9 months of pregnancy, and they said we don't need to determine that question of when life begins. That's the whole issue regarding abortion.
Well, and I guess we shouldn't be surprised in that Time magazine now has had a kind of a call to arms. It's basically a warning saying the abortion industry is woefully losing the battle over life. Front page just recently, and this comes as we find out that I just recently read that last year Planned Parenthood has received more taxpayer funding, $500 million in 1 year, more time than in their history. Yet they continue.
$1.2 million per day that they have received. So we've got an administration and a president going one way. We've got science and law going another way. Eventually, Roe versus Wade is going to be an island that will simply be eroded away. But we need to stand for life, and we need to stand against this administration and Obamacare that ultimately forces abortion funding by employers as well as individuals as well. Stand with Liberty Counsel as we continue to advance life and speak for those who cannot speak for themselves. Go to Liberty Counsel's website right now at lc.org. Sign up for the Liberty Alert email. You can also sign up for our Grassroots Action email as well. That's for activism. If you want to be an activist, that's the email to get on. That's lc.org. You can also go to Liberty Counsel's other website, libertycounsel.com. Remember Liberty Counsel in your prayers as we advance family, religious freedom, and the sanctity of life. And also remember us in your regular contributions to Liberty Counsel. That's lc.org.
You have been listening to Faith and Freedom with Liberty Counsel. We hope that we have motivated you to stand up for your faith, family, and freedom. We can accomplish a lot when we work together. Get informed and get involved today. Sign up for our free monthly newsletter, The Liberator. We will send it out to you free of charge. Stay informed with our Liberty Alert email updates. Just click on the website at www.lc.org or call us at 1-800-671-1776. Tune in next time to learn more about your rights right here on Faith and Freedom.